set of 9 videotapes provides an opportunity to share in a unique experience where Stafford Beer introduces an audience to the world of managerial cybernetics. The event took place over 5 days in July 1994 at the Falcondale Hotel near Lampeter in Mid Wales. It was organised by the Liverpool Business School at John Moores University, where Stafford is Honorary Professor in Organisational Transformation and a Senior Fellow. The aim was to provide a video learning resource by recording discussions between Stafford and an audience that had little or no previous knowledge of the subject. Over the course of the event, Stafford explains the development of the subject from the initial scientific discovery of cybernetics. Through his own development of managerial cybernetics, he introduces the tools and models that he has created to offer an alternative approach to conventional management practice. The resulting material embraces the key principles and models that have previously been introduced in his 13 books and referred to in many of his published papers. This is the first learning resource where all these have been brought together in one integrated way. Managerial cybernetics continues to be the only available scientific and coherent account of effective managerial practice. Stafford provides numerous anecdotes, applications and insights from the perspective of practitioner, manager and scientist. Having fully specified the inside and now, the focus of session 8 switches to the complementary outside and then. This is represented by the meta-system comprising systems 3, 4 and 5. Within this, the system 3-4 homeostat is highlighted for special attention. Stafford reports back that every major business failure he has come across is in some way deeply dependent on the failure of this homeostat. However, for viability, the system 3-4 interactions will have to be connected by very high variety loops, and organizing this homeostat is therefore extremely difficult. Stafford moves on to examine the nature of system 4 and discusses the roles of R&D, market research and corporate planning. In effect, this process is about managing the future of the organization, and as such is placed on the vertical axis and is subject to accountability. Stafford argues that the structure of the recursive model of 5 subsystems and prescribed channels of communication provides the necessary and sufficient basis for fully specifying the laws of viability.
Okay, folks, well, now at last you've got the official diagram. You can probably see why I didn't dish that out in the first morning. It is awfully complicated, and it's the result of years and years of refinement. As you see, the systems 1, of which there are only 2 examples, are, pardon? Are at an angle, and the reason for that is obviously so that I can get to the environments in both levels of recursion. You see the idea? Now, the reason why I would like to give them this out first is because it's not until you get the really rather carefully drawn diagram that the argument about recursion becomes demonstrated. You take one of those things that's at 45 degrees and turn it through 45 degrees, make it upright, and of course it is identical with the whole model. But identical, there isn't anything missing. Now when I started off, you see, I had mathematical set theoretic expressions for all this in order to prove the isomorphism, that is to say that they are identical. But nobody could understand that, not surprisingly. So I reduced it to drawing, where you can see it quite clearly. You can pick on one of those lines and find it at the other level of recursion in every case, I guarantee. So we've got a very, very powerful tool here, and the other thing that becomes clear from looking at this is the connections between the two levels of recursion. Now, one of those connections is the embedment of the lower level of recursion as a viable system. But if you look closely at all these lines, what do we see? We see that in the higher recursion, System 3 and System 4 both have a black dot in them, which is reproduced in the lower level of recursion, also in System 3 and System 4. So this is the kind of linkage that we can expect to find, making cohesive the whole organization that we've decided to study. So you must expect to find that, but you won't very often. Now, is there anything you'd like to ask me about this diagram as such? I want to go back to the meta-system, which is the thing in the big box, namely 3, 4, 5, in a minute, and let's look at it more closely, because we didn't really finish with that last session. But apart from that, is there something you want to ask me about, especially about recursivity?
The second system 1, the bottom, has got perpendicular line coming out the box with a little square.
Yes.
Is that just basically saying that should go to the environment?
Absolutely it is. It's supposed to be exactly the same as the one above it, but you know there's a limit to how much confusion you can create. Well, now you're familiar with it, now you've been shown how to develop it, it's not nearly as terrifying as it would have been if you is it? I mean, surely okay, Kate, I'll buy that. But it becomes an old friend before very long, especially if you start using it. Now, how to use it is the next thing. Would you all take one of these? Now, what you'll see here is the same chart, only it's all blank, and the purpose of this is that you can cut it where you like and paste it together, and you've got the top of the chart and you've got the bottom of the chart, right? Now, if you had, how many is it? I can't see it. If you, yes, there's enough for everybody. How many systems 1 are there on that chart? 5, yes. Well, if you only had 3, what you would do is slice the top off the second chart and stick it on, and then you would have 3. Because, see, the whole thing is completely uniform. So that's right, Lindsay, that's how you would do it. Perfect. And then you fill in your piece. Now, what of course I would like you to do in the morning is to try and do that, because we isolated System 1 already, and we're beginning to talk about, we spent some time on System 2, And you take your own group, the Parliament and the retail and so on, and try and make that. Quite a good idea to use a pencil unless you've got a spare photocopier in your luggage. It's quite amusing that under the Copyright Act nobody's supposed to copy things out of a book, and they are copied out of the book. And so in order to deal with that, well, that doesn't matter. Manchester University refused to copy my own diagrams. This is the kind of mess you get into with regulations that nobody understands in cybernetics terms. So what I did was, did Buckley return the book? I don't see it. Oh. Well, you can have a look at it later. These charts are at the back, and there's a big notice in red which says, by consent of the publishers and the author, you may photocopy these charts, but not the rest in the book. And we had lawyers and all manner of fuss getting this done, you can imagine. Anyway, you may copy it. So if you really wanted to study all this, you would read The Brain of the Firm and The Heart of Enterprise. But these come from the small book, Diagnosing the System, which is a kind of cookbook for when you've already understood it. And of course that doesn't work. People buy the small book, never bother with the in-depth discussion. Pity. Can't win. Anyway, you can use those. So that means if you were going to arm yourself to do this work, and you buy the small book, or even borrow it out of the library, you photocopy all these pages regardless, make yourself a lot of those, you see. And it does save an awful lot of time. You get very sick of doing this, I can tell you. So that's the second one. Now, the next one, let's take a look at this. I'll take the top one, thanks. Now, this chart is to deal with System 2 and System 3 star, and what you've got here is one unit of System 1, just for the sake of positioning it, and it enables you to nominate five different Systems 2 and different Systems 3 star. So you may get on the right hand side, you would get house style, and you would get safety rules and all of that. Uniform accounting procedures, these are all System 2 things. So that's to help you analyze that. Then this is to help you analyze any homeostat that attracts your particular attention. You got it, Karen? Yeah. Now, this one, remember what I said to you, that on this full chart, if you start counting all the possible loops at all levels of recursion, you're going to have thousands of homeostatic things to study. And I said to you not long ago, well, you won't be able to do that, and a lot of them would be repetitive anyway. So what you do is find something that particularly attracts you. Now, a very outstandingly good example of that is the homeostat linking System 4 to the outside world, where you might very well want to make a detailed inquiry. And that's how to do it. Chart is, gives you an example, so that you don't forget what all this is supposed to mean. And then if you just take a quick look at the things I've written in there, you will see that we're making an attempt to nominate right in the center of the diagram a criterion of stability. What is it I've got? Sales of, it's sales in this case, yes. So the various units are supposed to have sales within that bracket. Don't forget the definition of a homeostat. I bet you've forgotten it. Anybody going to tell me?
Stable loop.
That's good, Lee. I got you. It's brings it back to it. Keep a critical variable level. What's the last bit? Within physiological limits, because no one is going to come along and give you a thermometer inside your body to measure temperature with it. It's the interplay of things that settle these criteria. Now, as a manager, you're entitled to say, well, these sales are lower than I like, and I would like to get them stabilised at these levels, and then you can see whether the homeostatic arrangements are likely to get it there or not. Have you had time to take in some of those nominated channels and transducers? So that is the toolbox, as it were, for doing all this. And there is another thing called the toolbox, which has just been published by my friend and they say Elena's old doctoral supervisor, same fellow. His name is Barry Clemson in America, who has just published a paper about a piece of software that is called Toolbox, which gives you the DSM on the screen and enables you to go zooming in on bits of it and write stuff in, and it's fun, and it's a very good idea, don't you think? So the reprint of Diagnosing the System will have Barry's new paper in as an appendix. He's kindly consented to do it on the program. You'd be lucky. So I said to him on the phone, what am I to tell people who say they want this? And he said, well, you can only send them to me. And I said, you're not telling me how much? And he said, come on, it's Stafford, you know me. He said, if they've got no money, I shan't charge them. But if they're General Motors, I should charge them about $1 million. Okay, I'll do the same thing. You know?
Is this chap
Barry Clemson, C-L-E-M-S-O-N, and the paper is in the current issue of Systems Practice. Now, do you know this magazine, this journal? Comes out of Hull. Hull is a very, do you know this? Burgeoning department of systems people. Two full professors there, Michael Jackson and Bob Flood. You never come across this. You see, they're amazing conspiracies of silence everywhere. And two full professors in one university is not bad. And a whole group there, they're boiling away. They do a lot of publishing, and they publish, no, they don't publish it. Klingon Press in America publishes this journal, but they edit it. Now, I've got a copy of that paper here. If anybody particularly wants it, I guess we can fix that up, but I'm not about to lumber my friends with photocopying enormous papers for everybody. And that goes to one or two other things I've got, but I want to be helpful. I don't want to dish them out just for the sake of it. And if you feel you could use it, you're welcome. So there's the toolbox plus a bit of software availability, and good luck with that. Now let's go back to where we were in the detail of the metastructure, which looks like this. I'm not going to draw the whole thing now. I'm talking about the outside and then, which is with these enormous arrows here, and that's what our session after dinner will be about. And I draw them like that, you see, because they're bound to be very high variety. I mean, you just think of the seriousness of that, of getting that balance right. Now, I have a theory that every major business failure that I've ever come across is in some way or another deeply dependent on the failure of that homeostat. Now I want to give you an example. You're all too young, I think, to remember the collapse of Rolls-Royce. When was it? You may.
Still going, isn't it?
Well, yes, but it had to be property revived and government subsidised.
Still collapse is still going.
It blew up altogether. Now, this was a very remarkable business. I wish I could remember the date. I presume it was in the 70s. Must have been in the 70s. But I can't remember when. I'm there in Manchester Business School, and along with me is the National Westminster Bank Professor of Finance, whose name is Clarkson. And Professor Clarkson and his reader used to lecture on the failures of top 500 companies. Because it's quite amazing how many of them go down. You know, you only have to figure in a book like the In Search of Excellence, and you're going to be busted in a couple of years. But nobody seems to find this funny. You know this famous book. I think it's excruciatingly funny. So, Clarkson and his reader said to each other, you know, this is pretty trivial. We pick up the latest crash and analyse it. Well, that's wise after the event. And if you come to somewhere in the list of the top 500, somebody is going to crash. And if we're so clever, they will know it is. And they went through the balance sheets and so on, and they came on Rolls-Royce. And they started giving seminars in Manchester Business School about the collapse of Rolls-Royce. And what a beautiful example. See, because as you know, Rolls-Royce is the epitome for non-collapsing. You know, it's the, you know, people say this is a Rolls-Royce of pens, don't they? Stupid as it may be. I mean, it's got into the language as a symbol of perfection. And here they were saying it was going to crash. Well, British people are very urbane, and they said, oh yes, thank you, that's an interesting seminar. He finally ran into a group of top executives, and they were very angry, and they said, you can't go around defaming one of our top institutions. And one or two of these guys, I think, knew some of the directors of Rolls-Royce. So they went to Rolls-Royce and said, do you realise what's happening here? So you better get these two maniacal professors to come and give their seminar in the boardroom. So this was duly arranged, and they did. Now, of course, what happened was totally predictable. The guy said afterwards, how very stimulating, thank you very much. And crashed. There's something awfully English about that. Now then, the reason, there was a thing called the RB211 engine, which was critical to one of the big white jets, which Rolls-Royce made. And what they did was, in accounting terms, he's a professor of accounting, and I'm not too clear about the details now, but they funded the R&D out of income in a way that the accounting profession doesn't approve of, and thereby, in a sense, spend all the money twice. Well, that's fine. You shouldn't do it. You can pick it up as an accounting deficit, but look in these terms. What it means is that you're putting too much money into development that you can't, in System 4, that you can't sustain by your ongoing activity in System 3. And of course, the counter example is the buggy whip. You see, you're not doing enough System 4 to realise that the whole thing is going, and visibly putting all your money into improving a worthless product. So I'm trying to convince you that this thing is about the most important thing on the board. And as I explained to you, I drew it from biological reasoning, that this was where to make the revision or cut. Now then, we started talking about who are systems, what sort of functions are systems for? And we made a whole list, and you left out corporate planning, and I was saying, well, that's really it, you know. Now, let's look at all those people. If this is supposed to be an integral function dealing with the future and the company's whole posture in regard to innovation, don't you think it's extraordinary none of these people ever talk to each other? I may be exaggerating a bit, but not much. Have you ever heard of a market researcher who found out what the R&D boys in white coats were doing? And do you think R&D boys in white coats give a damn what the market research people are thinking? They're following their technological nose. They can see where they're going, or they hope they can go, and they pursue that. Now, this is completely crazy. So, the next thought is to say, well, put them all in one room, you know, but that's silly as well. What you've got to do is provide some method of focusing system for. That's the word I like. You don't necessarily have to move anybody, you focus them. Now, the case of corporate planning is particularly bizarre because corporate planners have tended to have enormous power and influence, and they are very eminence grise, and they're lurking around the background, plotting. And they write enormous reports. And there's so many people in the field of management, and I don't exempt all these consultants we were talking about, whose worth is judged by the weight of the report. That's worth 50 grand, you know. And if it were just a single piece of paper saying, stop it at once, it wouldn't be worth it. So, gradually, corporate planning seemed to me to be getting into the situation where it was writing all these reports, and they accumulated on the shelf. And what it really said over the top, and maybe you could read it, was, you poor old decision maker, you, if you ever have to take a decision, you better read all this first. Well, you see, you've got to take a decision, you're in a hurry, and you're not going to do that. And most of this effort was more or less wasted, it seemed to me. And as to whether any of these people were consulting the R&D or the market research, they were not. They thought essentially about taking over somebody else and grandizing the corporation. Well, I was very much confronted by this when I was development director of international publishing, which was then about 10 times the size that it subsequently became. I'm talking about the 60s. And I had all this going on. Now, I was responsible for all the R&D. And in order to save money, because R&D uses a lot of floor space, I took it out. The main building is in Holborn, as you remember, the famous mirror building, the red one in Holborn. I took R&D out to Felton, which is near the airport. And that paid off in terms of money, and paid off in terms of the fact that the people doing it were not bothered by anybody, because nobody ever got that far, except me. I used to go from my home every morning to Felton and into London for lunch, and home again this way with a different secretary on each leg of the trip. So how's this darn car? So there they were, and I could not get my fellow directors to visit the place because it's just too far. They're busy. And they say, well, I'm sure you're doing a great job. I was responsible for all the computers. Now, the number of computers is absolutely terrifying. We had four 1108s for a start, and about 10 of the 408s, this is Univac, do you remember these machines? And the IBM 360, 50, 360, 60, 350, 70, and all these things, too long ago, archaic now, of course, but they cost millions, and they were all over the company, and I was in charge of all of them. Nobody could give me a complete list when I got there. And as to whether you could unify that system, such as having the same software on different machines, nightmare. So I'm trying to give you a picture of what a mess System 4 can be, and why it is that when you start talking about it from this perspective that I'm offering, nobody knows what you're talking about. They say, well, that's Thompson. These are the computers. What do you mean? What's the connection? Then I took over market research. They were all working out of Holland and wouldn't move because it was head office and prestigious. What else did we have? Oh, the corporate planners wouldn't speak to me because they said they were responsible directly to the managing director. Now, how do you provide a focus for this lot? Well, I did my best. And when I started mixing them up, I started having quite expensive meetings where everybody came to the same place and read papers to each other about what they were doing and got severely told off if nobody could understand them, which was a tendency, of course, to try and pull people's eyes. Gradually trying to get the notion across that System 4 is in fact managing the future of the company. And the other thing I want to say about it, about System 4, is the thing I asked, well, you all move around yet again. I asked somebody, I think it was Dave, to remember was it you?
I don't know. To tell what I was supposed to remember.
Yeah. Someone was talking about the responsibility of line staff. I think it was then.
Yes. Yeah, you say that what
Oh, that's right.
Trust control dilemma.
Work both ways. It's one thing about them doing it, it's another thing about them letting them do it. So they think they've got a responsibility, but
That's
at the end
right.
of the day they don't want to actually use it.
Well, I find this, and I replied, well, I got into very hot water because of my views, and I'll tell you about them, and that's now. Early on in the modern management consulting, there was a guy called Colonel Erwick, or what's that name still, as a consultant company, still figure I don't know. And Colonel Erwick brought into high prominence in civilian field the army conception of line and staff. So the line people had the authority and responsibility, and the staff people were advisory. Now, after I had made this model and thought about it, I came to the conclusion that this was dangerous nonsense, except that it was accepted wisdom. Everybody knew this. And it's dangerous nonsense because the rate of change, you will see this kind of graph, the acceleration of the rate of change, hair rating, it's at least exponential and probably hyperbolic, this explosive curve. And you're trying to deal with that. Let me just draw that for you because I think this is very rapid. Can I be small up here? If you take time going this way and go back, that's 1 AD, that's 1000 AD, that's 2000 AD. This is a pretty compressed graph. You take almost anything, any quality of human abilities. Take the speed of travel. Someone gets on a horse in 1 AD and he gallops for 1500 years or so at whatever that interval is. This is the payoff up here. 20 miles an hour, I don't know what it is. And then someone invents the steam engine and this line starts to go up and it goes like that. And this is the escape velocity from the atmosphere. You can now go, what is that, 28,000 miles an hour. And what? Now, take something else, computation. Back here, the Romans were going 111, 1V, V111. You know, it's not going to be very fast. So again, you're counting essentially on your fingers and toes for a long time, and then somebody starts, it's in my book there, you were looking at me, quite late on, people like Leibniz, Pascal, started trying to make machines, and then that blew. And now, you know, nanoseconds and all the rest of it, it's completely unbelievable what you can compute. Well, I'm not going on with the examples. I put it to you, you won't be able to think of something that isn't doing that. And what I want to draw to your attention is the effect on us as human beings is the following, that we have been brought up culturally for at least 2,000 years with a lifespan. There's a lifespan, now it's exaggerated because there's 1,000 years, not many of us are 600 years old. But you see what I'm trying to say. We're born, these lines that I'm depicting go through our life, and we die, and everything's much the same, nothing much has happened. But if you're born here, as we lot were, those lines are tearing through our guts. And you know, if you try, I mean, you see it in very practical ways. You decide you want to buy a computer, and you get all the latest issues of the laptoppery. And before you can place, you place the order and say that's the best buy, and tomorrow something comes out with 1,000 times more capacity at a quarter of the price. You literally can't keep up with it. And it's the same in everything. I mean, everybody replaced all their old gramophone records with modern ones, and then before you could say knife, it was CDs, and so forth. So this makes the function of adaptation, which of course is the system call function, extremely difficult to implement in a way it never was before. I believe that this is qualitatively different. Just because it's faster, we tend to say, well, things go faster these days, but because of that argument of what happens to you in your lifetime, I think it's worse than that. I think it's something that we are not adapted to. We don't know how to handle this. And then when you put it in the business context and talk about investing in all this stuff, well, I like to tell stories that are real, it goes back to the IPC thing. See, I was joining a board who believed that publishing was about putting ink on paper, and said, well, we can make that faster, and we could. And if you've ever seen a modern newspaper printed, you can't see it going by, it's so fast. But, of course, I knew I could put a lot of sophisticated electronic controls on that, but even so, it's a kind of superhead cast. And in 500 years, nothing's happened except it got faster. So I started thinking about that. Now, if you look at the speeds and the rate at which computers operate, I rapidly realized that every copy of the Daily Mirror, and I told you there's 5 million of them, could be tailor-made to one reader, except that every copy had 5 readers. What you would do is you would edit a newspaper this big, you would carry Lee's profile, and you would find out what Lee was interested in, and the computer would print the appropriate pages. And I found that this was technically possible. Now then you start thinking, now this is where quantity changes to quality, it seems to me. Because if I were producing 13 different newspapers for you people, I could ask you all what you wanted to know, and that would be a nice legitimate thing to do. But I could tell you what I thought you needed to know, which is a bit what happens now. Thank God it's not as targeted as I'm discussing. And I started getting extremely worried about this because look at all those computers. Why do you think I had all those computers? We had a magazine division which produces Woman, Woman's Own, Woman's Realm, Nova, Woman's Journal, the whole range of the market. We had a technical division that's doing Electronics Weekly, that's doing 400 titles. Now, nobody identifies this. You see, people buy all these magazines and they don't realize they're the same thing. They're just sort of souped up a bit in different ways, the same publisher. So you've got people who are sending in premiums and offers, filling in forms and mail ordering stuff and winning prizes and all of this. And all this is in computers. Now I very rapidly realized that when I gave evidence to Congress, that was in American Congress, that was in, I think, 1970. And that's a hell of a long time ago. I'd already got something like 30 million profiles in my computers, and there are 50 million people in the country. And these profiles are deducible. Now, you see, I could say, Kathy here, what do you know about Kathy? She's, we know her size because she keeps ordering interesting garments and gives the size. And we know that she's got, forgive me, I better show you that she's got a child because she orders things for the children. And we know what, she has 3 kids of 3, 5 and 7. We know what she reads. She's joined the book club to improve herself. She keeps buying presents for her husband. Why is Grandad, who buys books on the Holy Land, also buying pornography from one of the other publishers? Can't you see how rich this could become? And what I said in the evidence to Congress, which is, by the way, printed in this book, Platform for Change, was that if we weren't damn careful, see, we'd be in a totally delicious, wrong word again, thank you, the frown. It's a directed society, a society where unbeknownst you would be, this is Orwell, this is Huxley's Brave New World, all coming true, for goodness sake. So these things are really very serious, and that raises the issue of what is your ethical stance going to be about any of these developments. And that's where you need a system 5. However, going back to the main line of this story about the focus of System 4, I was doing so many things with electronics now that my colleagues who thought it was about paper and ink could hardly believe. And I started the first profitable electronic publishing outfit in the world, which was a thing called SCAN, Stockbroker Computer Answering Network, which put a computer terminal into the stockbroker's office, and all the data was fed in overnight on the previous day's trading, adding in any balance sheets that were published, and you could find anything out. And this was pretty darn powerful. And that was in 66 or 67. And it's a long time ago. Well, because people haven't understood the impact of this, here we are nearly 20 years on and still not being developed properly. No publisher can handle this. I said to my own publisher, who's bringing out all these new books, I'm going to make some videotapes next week. That's it. Oh, well, yes, good luck. See, you wouldn't think that there are 3 books devoted to this material, and it should be in the cover or something. So I determined then, as in my focus system for capacity, that the thing to do was not take over reads, which was what the idea was, and vertical integration reads own all the trees in Canada practically, last count. So the boys who thought it was about paper on ink wanted to take over Reeds, and we already had John Ryder, who's the chairman of Reeds, on our board, and we had more than 30% of the shareholding in Reeds, so we virtually owned it anyway. And I thought, no, we don't want to do that. I wanted to take over Plessy. And you can see why. Well, I didn't succeed, but I came rather close to that one, because I had collaborators inside Plessy in roughly my kind of position. And we used to meet in secret, and it was very exciting. Anyway, I'm getting rather off track, but I'm trying to give you the flavour of what I think a System 4 ought to be, and you won't find those things around you anywhere. You find all the bits and pieces, and nobody with the realisation that it is about the outside of them, and it is invoking an homeostatic balance with the existing system. So that's what I'm trying to punch home. And as one technology takes over for another, I'm just trying to find another call with this mirror. Again, payoff and time. What happens is that a new technology comes along. I'll get out of the way. I have to stand here to draw it. A new technology comes along, and you invest in it, and it doesn't pay off for some time, not much anyway. It's flat, and then it begins to grow like the clappers, and then it fades away. And why does it fade away? Because a new technology is overtaking it, and that is going to be more expensive, and it's going to start like this, and then it's going to do that. Now, there's the interesting question. If you are soaked in technology A, as OBC was in paper and ink as a mode of publishing, and you can see electronics coming along behind, which is the blue line, at what point do you level off your investment in paper and ink and research associated therewith and start investing in the electronic version? Pardon? Well, yes, but you don't know what that is. This is notional, you see. And you certainly don't know where they cross the second time, which is the crucial one. So you have to guess. Well, you make studies, of course, but you're going to be wrong. And that is very interesting. So about this time, I invented Beer's law of economics, which said that the crossover point here happens 2 years after I retire as a director of this company. You think that one out. See, it means that it's my perfect excuse for not doing it. You know, it's all right. I'm a director. I don't want the company to go bust in some crazy new scheme. Just give me my pension and go. And this won't happen till afterwards. Oh, yeah. It's full of traps. But actually, what you have to do is try and estimate that. So, the question of how to organise a 3/400 stat is very difficult. Oh, I know, I haven't completed the argument about the line and staff. Aha. Well now, these staff people who were supposed to be advisors, they come along and they're highly manipulated. They think they know more, which they probably do, than the managers they're trying to serve. So the typical corporate planning report says something, I'm going to outrageously simplify again. It says, well, basically two courses, A and B. It's always A and B. If you follow course A, you'll probably will all be millionaires by Christmas. Course B is very interesting, but will probably be bankrupt by Easter. Now, you're the manager. You have to decide. What? Now, I told you there's no simplification, but things are done like that. And you think what they're done about. If you want a new computer, you don't ask old Harry in the cost department what's the best machine to buy. You've got a new intake of nice young graduates who have got the newest technology leaking out of their ears, and this little group determines what the next computer's going to do if you've got any sense. And if you haven't, they will do it anyway and find a means. And they say, I'm not working here without a Ulysses X-116, you know. So they plot and they push it up the line and it goes through because nobody understands what the choices are. And the choices are put to the board and they sit there saying, yes, I studied this report, Mr. Chairman, and I think, well, anybody who's any good is going to manipulate that through. So I realized, and I insist on this, that the people who used to be staff are actually taking all the decisions. Or most of them, and certainly those that are technologically based, on which the future of the 3-4 homeostat depends. So I say they've got to be accountable. It's no use saying after you told me to buy that, say, I'm sorry, I'm only an advisor. Now, when I started preaching this, when I first became a professor in 1969 at the Manchester Business School, there was a total uproar. Because everybody said, Stafford, you are trying to seize power for people like you. I said, you must be nuts. I'm not trying to seize power. I'm trying to hold people accountable. At the moment, they're swanning around pretending it's nothing to do with them. So that's where that row developed. And that is why System 4 is on the vertical axis and not sticking out the side as it always is on organisation charts. So you've got a thing out here somewhere reporting sideways to the managing director called corporate planning. You've got a scientific director and a thing out sideways called the R&D department. And you've got a marketing director and a thing out sideways saying market research. And no focus and no responsibility. Well, I don't think that's good enough. So I say these things are all accountable. And I think it's much more important to get that across than hold somebody right down the line accountable on the lines that James, we were discussing how to bring that home and so on. It's truly to compare with this kind of accountability in which the whole future of the company depends. I think, don't you? So, what else gives about this? Well, understanding that far more important than these reporting loops which come down here, which need to be there, which do exist. But far more important is the way I depict this, as I showed you quickly on the last chart, is say, you guys on the board are supposed to monitor that homeostat. If you don't get that balance right, the company will blow up. And the same goes for the country, you know. If the government doesn't make the right investments, and so much R&D is sponsored by government now, either directly or because companies can't spend money on R&D unless the government has bought 6 million aircraft or whatever it's going to do. So the thing is enormously artificial, and yet we like to pretend we live in a market economy. And the whole thing's as screwed as possibly could be. So this gives System 5 a very peculiar role, it seems to me. And I believe that most of it has to do with the ethos of the company and what counts as good behaviour. If the directors of the company seem to be rip-off artists, it will go right through the company like that. And this is how corruption happens in countries, as you know. Is that you get some dictator set up in the Banana Republic who orders gold beds and 16 Cadillacs and things like that, and everybody says, oh yeah, well, this too. It just goes through the whole system like canker. Whereas, if it's fully understood that there's no monkey business, you see, and you're out, slightest, you can maintain that, and people do. Now, look what's happened in government in my lifetime. When Dr. Dalton was Chancellor of the Exchequer, he said something injudicious about his budget speech and instantly resigned. Nowadays, go to bed with practically anybody who will do so and tell them all about it. It's completely amazing. Has anybody read Alan Clark's diaries? They're really good fun. Unbelievable. But this is a defence minister. Unbelievable. Jolly good read too. I didn't stop laughing. So more recommended books. So I'm talking about ethos. Can anybody say anything enlightening about that? I'm not just talking about malpractice either, or kidneys. What is the company really trying to do? I mean, look at some of the issues.
Are they trying to, I mean, does a company see the future of the economy as part of its responsibility?
Future of what, sorry?
Of the economy, which is operating. So that in terms of employment, or training, in effect, you're concerned about education. Now that's all the environment stuff, isn't it?
Well, this of course is the ultimate issue. There are many companies, going back to what Kate was saying, which have a very responsible attitude and haven't seen themselves making money. The huge thing that happened about the so-called Thatcher Revolution was that it constantly urged people to say, well, that's the only thing that actually matters is money. And maybe it's going to take the rest of my life to recover from that. It's very, very insidious stuff. Well, absolutely. And then what happens to the planet? What happens to the community? What happens to training? The whole thing is very insecure. Now, plenty of companies have been much more responsible than that in the past. This first steelworks I was in Samuel Fox, in the valley of Stocksbridge outside Sheffield, had a community totally dependent on it, and half their policies were about the good, the eudaimonia, as I would say, which is Aristotle's word, meaning well-being. It's a special kind of happiness, not euphoria, but well-being. And they try to make life pleasant for those people. Of course, in the most absurdly patronising, patriarchal and mingy way, but nonetheless, they had this in mind. And of course, the environmental business. The awful cynicism developed about companies trying to claim that they have this high on their list of priorities where all their expenditure is a cover-up job to try and prove that they are responsible when they manifestly aren't. It's a lot of
But then there are companies that are usually much smaller ones whose aim is precisely to, for example, to produce bridges that don't have bridges.
Well, there are some. I suspect, Kate, we just have to recreate the industry after this debacle with the bottom line. And there are a lot of signs that this is happening. You see, there are a lot of co-ops. Well, that is a different kind of business altogether. Anybody heard of Suma? Is the co-op in the north that feeds all the health food shops. It's a huge affair. And my friend there has tried to design the whole thing on the value system. Well, that's nice. Especially, you see, because it's the way it's drawn. People say this is a hierarchy. I will have none of it. Well, it isn't, you see. I think you should know that by now. The centre of this is System 1. All the other things are services to System 1. So too bad if you're System 5 and think you're a big shot.
One relations that with ethics, with what we talked about with this thing about mission statements. They churn out. There's a company I know of that basically the week before they got ISO 9000 accredited, came up with this mission statement which they issued out to everyone in the company. Timing, I'm sure, was a total coincidence, but that's what happened. And this mission statement basically had the clear statement that their aim is to make money. Fairly upfront about that. But to the benefit of shareholders, directors, and employees alike. I think I might miss somebody out there. Unfortunately, about a week after it had been released, there was an advert in a local paper, or not an advert, an article in a local paper talking about the board of this particular company that had all just received incredible pay rises. At the same time, the annual pay agreement has been going on for about the previous 3 months, arguing over about 0.3% on a 2% raise. Now, of course, the first thing you see on the board is this article stuck on the board and one of these cards pinned next to it. And of course, the hypocrisy of that, of course, is that it's not quite
well done.
meeting what it's saying.
No, it's
a real shame. And everyone loses heart and the whole thing is...
yeah, it's very counterproductive in their hands. The word, if you were trying to list these people, the word that's got very popular in North America now is stakeholders. You heard the word over him? Because that includes everybody with a stake in the thing, and that includes customers and suppliers and the village and the word. In fact, it's so hold-all, it's a portmanteau, that catch-all, I suppose is the English word, that perhaps it's no use. Maybe you need to itemize these things.
It's been on the ethical atmosphere in the organisation connected very much with system too. Because seems to balance contradictions or balance.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Well, I think that all 5 systems are involved in the ethic. But I think that because I like this word, I've used it several times, ethos, which is the feel, of the place. The ideal is certainly set from System 5, if they want to set it. But then, of course, it is going to be reflected in terms of what each of the other subsystems does. And you could follow any notion of that through. This is why I think the model is so useful. Nobody's asked me yet, but it will occur to you sooner or later, why 5 subsystems, why aren't there 17 or 3? Well, I've tried to argue on the basis of this necessary and sufficient. But of course one could break it down more. And what I've tried to do is to provide a language. Think of this model as a language which is rich enough to talk interestingly about an organisation, and not so rich that you have to go away for 10 years to master the language. Now, I have found that if I get commitment at the top, I can sell this language inside a company very fast, and everybody uses it, and it is useful. For instance, I've very often heard in meetings somebody say, "Oh, for God's sake, Jim, shut up. Can't you see I'm not talking about that level of recursion. I've come down too." Well, instantly you see it all. And we're also used to top-level board meetings trying to grapple with the new cyclotron or with the nature of the EEC or something. And they all end up talking about whether the office boy should have free tea or you're going to build a new bicycle shed because it's easier. And everybody knows the issues. They thump the table and feel better. And the real issue is in 2 levels, 3 levels of recursion up. So that does help. And then again, the subsystems, you say, look, I'm talking a system 4 argument. You keep responding as if it were a 3 matter. isn't. I'm talking about the future. And these little words become very useful. Sorry.
What I'm worried about is if the sort of ethos is coming from defined. If you have a company in which the ethos is great, but there's corruption, people are happy, but the community is happy, right, and so forth. And it happens to be making weapons, and it happens to be the case that the government is selling these weapons to the country, which is then at war with yourself. What is it that they surely is it at the fifth level that they need to be damn sure that there isn't, that fortunately there were no TV cameras in the Scotland inquiry, so that it didn't become a thing that everyone talked about it. You had to find it in the newspaper
private eye
or wherever. So that if they thought, my God, supposing someone, boy in the village, she signs up and goes off and gets killed, and the people realise that they made the weapon that killed him.
Quite so.
So they've got to keep.
Well, they have. I don't know how anybody can do it. Again, I've created many uploads in my life. I created a terrible upload by giving a presidential address to the World Conference on Psychedelic stuff 6 years ago. And I said that the whole arms business was so complicated and so many people had their fingers in this pie. That the best way to stop it all was that scientists should just refuse to work. And if they starved, too bad, and maybe we could get a fund to look after them. But that really is going to pull the plug on the whole thing. I mean, at the moment, somebody used the word hypocrisy about something just now. There's a scheming hypocrisy of the whole business of arms. I mean, you equip third world countries who can't afford to feed, clothe, educate themselves, and then express surprise when they start shooting hell out of each other. What do you expect them to do? And they're being manipulated by, the whole motivation, the whole direction's got to be all wrong, isn't it? I think so. But then I'm regarded as naive. It's not quite the word probably that I would choose. Yes.
Right, you're working on level 5, and you've got your MDs board, and you might have some people in the management, and they've all agreed on this ethos of how people should act, and also, by the way, there's a consultancy who is selling some other thing, and they're all committed to this ethos, they're committed to doing this, and everybody's raring to go. And then what happens is that it gets lower down, and then they hit a brick wall, the middle management or the workers, and then it dies a death, and then it keeps going like this. And I've seen many companies doing this. They're searching for something, they don't know what,
right.
And then they grab something and try it out, and I'm consider everything's going to work. And in the end of the day, the whole organisation is so sick of hearing, it's cheeky, this is another one.
Yeah, exactly, the slogans.
Selling and manufacturing,
Yeah.
I'm doing it.
Well,
And how can we change that?
Well, I don't know. I'm doing my best is all I can say. The trouble is, you see, that the managers really, I don't know, it's because I'm a policeman and getting younger, I'm getting older. Managers really don't seem to be as capable of serious thought as they used to be, and that was not very good in the first place. And people are constantly demanding the new slogan, the 1 minute manager, all this kind of stuff. And it's enough to break your heart. All you can do is keep plugging away, and the cover of my new book says managers are getting fed up with slogans and realising that they're not, and that's what they should be doing. So all you can do, we have to try and recreate this thing. Now, see, you mentioned a specific problem of what happens if you run into a brick wall when you're on message. Don't forget, cybernetics is the study of regulation which instantly recognizes in the first set of stories I told you when we started that communication, information flow is crucial. Now, we have on the total diagram, every line on that is important, otherwise it wouldn't be there, and every line is actually a loop, not a homeostat. Now, what you've got to do is make sure that all that works, and what you're pointing to is a failure in channel capacity and transduction down the system. And it's no use saying, oh my God, that nobody cares. You know, it just means that you're incompetent in your failure to design a system that actually works.
So I'm just still worried about this, where the system 5. Well, it's going to intervene on Thor's with the environment, and they're going to be. I say someone in 5 wants a peerage, and they reckon they get a peerage if they don't have money goes to 25. That's just an example. And in Thor, but they can't afford to give that much.
Yeah, well, you're telling me. Yeah, well, they don't want the sack, do they? Give the poor bloke his ermine, I say. I mean, really, we're on the stuff that really sends me into despair. We've got to recreate all this stuff. And here are tools to do it, is what I'm saying. Now, you said you were worried. I am worried about the time, because this machine will run out of us. I'd like to close this here. We've got the whole model in our sights. Now, tonight, I want to talk to you about a very interesting phenomenon called autopoiesis. Yes, I thought that would please you at this late stage. Autopoiesis. Poi. And I also want to show you this new technique, which I think hugely affects the ability to deal with the homeostat. Now, one of you, certainly Kate, has used this technique. Nobody else did, I think. So this evening we will play these games, and you can see what this technique is, and I think you'll find it fun as well as interesting after dinner. And then tomorrow we will have a big wrap-up session. And then you can let loose, so sleep on it, try and get what is really bothering you out of the other. Try and finish the puzzle. What else are we trying to do? Yes, well, try and do your model now. Those of you who said, well, there's the Welsh Parliament, what are the bits, One final word about this. Several of you have said things like the chairman sitting in System 5. These subsystems are functions. They're things that are happening. Don't be too ready just to put people in there. Most people are all these things, especially the senior people in the company, are 3s and 5s and 4s. And the interesting thing is, what is the ratio of their time? Now, I once did a most amusing experiment there, whereby I asked all the directors of the company to say, I gave them a little matrix with all the names of the directors on both ways, and I said, put in round terms the percentage of time that you spend on 3, 4 and 5 and 1, because very often, of course, the chairman of a 1 ends up on the board or on the management committee in 3. Estimate that for yourself and estimate it for all the other directors. And the pattern that emerged from this is absolutely amazing. I really must do it again sometime, or you do it. I mean, it's, if you get the chance. Everybody thinks that somebody else is doing System 4. You see, I'm a down-to-earth man. I call a spade, and I'm 3. Or I'm a bit more important than 3, I'm 5. And he's the intellectual. He knows about computers. They're doing 4 somehow. And then you find that there's this huge gap if there's no fullness in the system. Now, I just want to end with this very dramatic statement. If 4 doesn't effectively exist, which I think is often the case, either because people don't know about it properly or because they don't get the focus, you remember that argument? So let's pretend it's not there. Now look at all this huge superstructure. 5 collapses into 3 because they hold it up. Isn't it? And by golly, this is borne out. You see, the people in 5 used to be in 3, and they've been given their peerage, so they're now up here. They're very uncomfortable, because they don't know what they're doing. So they love to collapse into 3. And they say, I know all about that, because I used to be the manager of 1. And they dive down here and never seen again. Now, my dramatic exit is, if this is an animal, and remember the physiology, what we've got here, if that happens, is a decerebrate cat. Now, you can take the cat's brain now down to the level of 3 and keep the poor little devil alive with intravenous injections. He seems all right. And what can he do? You poke his leg, he goes up. And that's it. And that's the state of an awful lot of our management. It just responds to stimuli. And usually the wrong response is that. And it's because we don't have the medical system in place.
So what you're effectively saying there, just this is for an instance, the manufacturing director running around on a shop floor telling what the operators want to do next. Is that about right? I've never seen it.
That's the way going to form it.
Yes, it is, but you said all collapsing down the hoop, and the superstructure's gone.
So they don't want to give away their control, do they?
Absolutely not. They're too insecure, you see, to sit up on the clouds there. Well, see you after dinner.